All right, everybody. So let's jump right in. We're going to go through quite a bit of stuff today. I want to make sure we give you some time at the end to ask some questions. So we'll do some intros real quick. All right. So good morning, everybody, and afternoon. Thank you for joining. So my name is Kevin Farr, and I'm the executive director and head of innovation for a company called Centered. So we do innovation and critical thinking and creative work. That is the core of what we do. It is the only thing that we do. So kind of who are we and why are we talking to you today? So I founded Centered ultimately as a place for creative weirdos and really smart people to get together and do some creative thinking on problems. And then I'd like to introduce our head of narrative design. Go for it, Kelly.
Hi there. My name is Kelly Stevenson. As Kevin said, I'm the head of narrative design at Centered. And in terms of my role, narrative design is really kind of a marriage or a combination of what we're going to talk about today. So taking some of the data and the insights and what the numbers and trends are telling us, and then adding that human element to it to make sure that we're staying focused on who we're using it for or who our users are, and just to kind of keep that story flowing.
Perfect. Thank you. And then our co-founder, Michael Shung, is our what we like to call our resident PhD dropout, and also an amazing jazz musician. He is not with us today, but the reason that we got tapped to talk to you is these are some of the brands that I've worked on over the past 15 years of my career. More importantly, like I'm an artist at heart, right? So I am a musician, a painter, a writer. Before I ever got into business, I started in the creative field, playing music and working as a writer. So when I got my first degree, I was a writer that whole time in music journalism. So my background started in the creative arts, and started with a lot of creative practices. And for me, the goal in life was to figure out how do I make money as an artist, because I just want to make art. Over time, that grew into me working for brands like this. Over time, that grew into me starting this is my second startup, which is Centered. And now these are the types of brands that we worked with. So there's nonprofits, there's healthcare firms, there's large corporations. And what is unique about all of these experiences that I've had as a creative is ultimately trying to figure out how do I monetize creativity, because I love the way it feels to just be creative. So that's why we got tapped today to talk to you. And I want to give Kelly, if you want to share a little bit about just your creative journey, and because you're also an artist that has also made your way into business. So if you want to give a little context on that as well, that'd be great.
Absolutely. Yeah. So my story is actually eerily similar to Kevin's. I actually graduated from college with a degree in theater and one in education, because I couldn't really decide whether I wanted to sort of help people and help them grow and learn, or again, that creative expression. With theater, I found my calling in costume construction, actually. So it's a similar place in terms of wanting to create art, but also wanting to do something useful with it. I could talk for hours on costuming, but again, trying to find that balance and that of expressing myself as an artist. I also write. I do a lot of textile work, knitting, crocheting, embroidering, and then wanting to take some element of that into my role as a professional as well. So I do a lot of design work there. So
we want to give you that context. So, like you're talking to fellow creatives and artists who have designed their life and worked really hard to figure out how to continue to be creative. And so when you listen to us talk today, we're going to talk from the perspective of artists and as artists that have built businesses and worked in the business sector. So to start with, Centered, the company that we both work at, is a creative thinking firm, right? The 4 tools that we use the most for creativity is UCD and design thinking, strategic foresight, which is like how do you look into the future and think about different new things in the future that don't exist now. Critical thinking and problem formulation is really the science of how to solve problems. And functional behavior design is an actual design it's a design methodology to design things around behavior. So these are the 4 tools that we take with us most frequently in the work that we do. There are a lot of other tools, but the reason we want you to see this is we're going to talk about the need for tools and we're going to talk about the value of tools in creative processes and what it does for you and your business. The way that we apply these tools and the way that we see the world are kind of, there's three types of systems that we work on, really big, complex systems that need a lot of creative thinking. And those are complex organizations. They've got stuff going on with economic and strategic innovation. There's small business or micro systems, which is really around like, how do we use creative thinking for products and services? And there's regenerative systems, which is really what do we do for social, environmental, and community innovation. Across all three of these types of systems, we're constantly deploying creative thinking tools and processes to uncover insights about how that system can change. So for those of you that do have training in UCD, this is where a lot of our UCD work comes up over and over again, and we're mixing this with other business tools in order to use the user insights to help us figure out products, services, or system level changes. So the way that we think about creativity and having teams come together to work on these type of problems is you need creative talent, you need creative tools, and you need a process for creative thinking. Innovation is really synonymous with creative thinking, right? A good definition of innovation is creative thinking that leads to novel or incremental change, right? So in order to develop something new, innovate something new, you need creative talent, people that know how to think creatively. They need tools to work with, like design thinking, UCD tools, HCD tools, other types of methodologies. And then they can innovate if they have a process to do that. So it's a lot of what we're gonna talk about today. And the way we're gonna organize this for you is the following. We're gonna talk about the economics of creativity, creative thinking processes, and imagination is an advantage. This is like dense topics that we could spend like hours just on one alone. But today the goal was like to give you some things to stimulate your mind. And then you can go from there, and you're welcome to reach out to both of us afterwards, ask any additional questions, but we want to give you some things to kind of start your creative thinking process. So let's first talk about the economics of creativity.
Well,
so
sorry, Kevin, before we move on, let's take a pause. I'm looking at the chat, and I've noticed that there's a request for us to pause and just kind of make sure and check in before we go from face to face about any questions you guys might have. So let's just kind of pause for a moment and ask if there's any questions so far. I know we've kind of talked mostly about who we are and why we're here.
Hi, Kelly. So what I'll do during the webinar is I'll be taking note of any questions, but it's also a good idea that here and there you stop to ask rather that if there are any questions about a certain segment that you just presented. But if they have any questions, they'll shoot them in the chat box, then I'll go through them at the end or at some break interval that you might decide to stop at.
Okay. Yeah, we appreciate that, Munya. We tried to carve out about like 15-20 minutes at the end just for everybody to kind of Q&A and workshop and go back through stuff.
Great, thank you. But they will take note of their questions either in the chat box or in their notepads or wherever they're typing. Thank you for that.
Yeah, if everybody wants to just put as we go along, any ideas, notes, anything that you want to say and share with us. Yeah, thanks for pausing, Kelly. Appreciate it. My thought was like try to get you all the information first, and then we go out, talk together. So yeah, if anybody wants to put their information, their ideas, their thoughts, anything in the chat, that'd be like a great log for us, and then we can spend time at the end going back through it. Okay. So let's jump into economics of creativity. The reason this is important to consider is creativity is not predictable. And a lot of how we get taught to think in business and in life in general is to try to manage things, control outcomes. And that gives us the illusion that we can predict things, predict a business outcome, predict the success of a product or a service. We even try to like predict the quality of like a relationship we have with someone that we're intimately involved with. Is this going to work? Is this not going to work? Right? Humans like to do that. It makes us feel comfortable and safe. The thing with the economics of creativity is it's not predictable because it's uncertain. You're imagining, you're making, you're exploring, you're experimenting. So what that means is creativity is messy and it's uncertain, it's risky. that risk has a whole bunch of stuff going on with it that actually has a value, right? And so the economics of creativity increases its value because it has risk, because it's uncertain. So, you know, when you're exploring and making something new, this is why startups sometimes do really well and come up with a really amazing product or service, and other ones don't, because some are really successful in what they're exploring and experimenting with, and it's the right time at the right place. They have the right audience, they've done the right research, and the product or service works. Other times people are exploring creativity and they haphazardly stumble onto something and it works. Other times people are trying to explore something and it doesn't work. So creativity has a lot of risk involved in it, and it can have a higher value because you can also charge more for the time it takes to do creative exploration, or you come up with a really novel insight that nobody else has come up with. And so you can have a wider share of the market, or you actually control a market for a period of time because you're the only person that has that product or service or offering in a specific area or geography. Anything you want to jump in on there, Kelly, on the economics of creativity? Go for it.
Absolutely. I think one of the challenges that for me, as somebody who has spent a lot of her life making sure that I don't step out of line and that I don't fail, is that really the key here, and that risk is the most important part of it. If you define your success as whether or not you failed, whether or not this risk ended up doing something amazing or important, then you're selling yourself short. So all of these different steps you take, the risks you take, even if they don't end up, in the upper echelons of financial success, they're all part of the growth process. And keeping that in mind as you take these risks helps you stay healthy, and it also helps you challenge you to take the next risk, as opposed to sort of stepping back and trying to be more conservative the next time.
Well said. Yes, take the risk. and to take that risk, you have to have a creative thinking process, right? You need one. If you're on this call and you are already live a very artistic lifestyle, you're early on in your creative practice, you may be like, I do what I want creatively, whatever I feel like. That's really useful, right? There's a time and a place for just free form exploration. There's also time and a place to have structure around what you do creatively, so that you can repeat the creative process to get to the point that you can actually sell something or productize something. Even if you want to be a studio artist and learn how to build an economy around that, there's a process that you go from having an idea to making a painting, to getting it in a gallery, to doing a show, to then getting paid for that. Right. So at some point there is a repeatable process. Even if the repeatable process has a lot of chaos in it, there's a way of repeating that to get to the final goal, which is ultimately to get paid for your creative thinking and your creative work. So what we want to show you is just an example of just like a template for a creative process. Everybody can make their own UCD, HCD, FBS systems. These are all like existing design systems for working through creative thinking. And then artists also come up with their own methodology. Like, that's one of the things Center does, is we borrow from a lot of the tools that we like, and then we have our own processes that we use depending on the type of creative problem that we're solving. But for here, we just want to give you like a very simple kind of framework of how to move through some steps, right? As an artist or creative, or someone using creativity in business, to really get to that value, to work through the uncertainty and the risk, this process helps you think about that, right? And so it's the same in line with what design thinking or ECD does. You have some type of stimuli, right? That's imagination, that's an idea, that's a prompt, that's a problem that you get. And the first step is playing in discovery, right? Like you start just playing around with the idea, with the concept, right? And in step two, you start maybe experimenting with making something, and you start playing around with it a little further. You have got some form, you've got some data, you got some information. In step three, you start testing something out. You start having people interact with it. They start giving you data on their experience. They start giving you feedback, and you use that feedback to repeat this process of play, experiment, test, repeat. UCD will have this in terms of thinking about how you do user research, how you collect user feedback, how you look for insights, how you use those insights to develop a prototype, and how you test that prototype. the purpose of us showing you this slide and not just showing you UCD is really to encourage you to think about your own creative process, especially for those of you that are entrepreneurs. Design thinking may not perfectly fit your business, or you really just you want to do things your own way. It's important to you to have your own step process. The purpose of showing you this slide is to encourage all of you to think through what is your creative process in the work that you do as an entrepreneur. And if you don't have a creative process, watch how you can start to learn a creative process just by watching how you do stuff. A lot of what I've developed as an artist, a lot of what I've developed inside of Centered has come from actually studying my own behavior and looking at other tools that I've practiced and used, and then documenting the process after I naturally just do it. Kelly, you want to talk a little bit about just creative process for you as things have evolved in your life and in your career?
Absolutely. I think one of the key things here with the creative process is that this is how your art and your passion become something that is profitable, that you can make a living from, or that you can devote your life to, as much of your life as you have space for it. I've worked with a lot of what we would call like sort of capital C creatives in agencies who have that mentality of, this is my art, and you're stifling me if you try to put some sort of form or structure around it. And what I've learned over the years is this is less about structure and sort of putting someone in a box and restricting their creativity. And it's more like a trellis or some other structure that your creativity can grow into, and to give it form and shape, right? If you have, beans or a vine sort of related plant like squash, and you don't give it some sort of structure to grow into, some place for it to fruit or to flower, you don't get what you want at the end of it. You have no beans, you have no squash. So what I find useful about this is it's giving you a direction and a path, and so you can keep yourself focused as much as possible.
Yes, and particularly on that focus, for any of you launching products or services or wanting to do that, and understanding how long it takes you to do something, make something, form something, and what costs are involved in that helps you understand how to price it in the marketplace. A lot of creatives struggle with running a business because they don't fully understand the cost and time it takes them to do their creative thing, whether they're making food, doing upcycling, designing fashion, furniture. There is a consistent challenge for artists to really understand how to price and value themselves. So what process does is it not only helps you move from creative thinking into a form, it really helps you understand costs and profit, so you can actually sustain your business, your startup, your service, or the work that you're doing for someone else, so that it can be repeatable. And this is one of the challenging things of doing creative work is being able to have some understanding of how long it takes you, what it costs you, and what you should price it at. The more that you understand that process, the more that you document that, the easier it becomes over time to come up with a value that feels right for you, so that you can keep doing your art. All right, so if you can start to get a sense of that creativity, there's an economy to it. There's definitely money to be made. There's definitely a lifestyle that you can have that's super creative. Having a process really helps you understand how you fit into that creative economy, how to make and form things. And if you actually practice this over and over, you actually get an advantage. And your mind is unique. It is that advantage when you are doing something creative, because no two minds organize information exactly the same. People will try to copy things sometimes, right? And there's always that's going to go on in the marketplace. But real imagination is to imagine new things and different things, or things in different ways. And so train and practice with your imagination. This is something that the more you do it, the more benefits you get from it. And training with your imagination is actually allowing your mind to explore things without expecting anything from it. There's a really good scientist that I've trained with in creative thinking, and his favorite story to tell people is that when he has something creative to think about, he doesn't think about it. He sits in a bath and he tries to think about nothing. And the reason for that is imagination is we've all had the experience of sitting somewhere and watching our mind just wander. Ideas come and go at the most random times, and that's the beauty of imagination, is ideas just come and go, and we want to allow our minds to explore things. And if we do that, and then we couple that with a process to take that imagination and experiment with actually making a product or service, if we use our imagination as part of the beginning part of a creative process, and we have a system for how we go from an idea in our imagination to making something, we start to train our imagination to be this like playground, this fertile field of where ideas can just come and go. And if we train our mind to not expect things of our ideas, we actually allow our mind to explore further. The minute that we have an idea and we start saying like, no, this can't be done, or here's all the reasons that are wrong with this, it stops the creative process. It's not that it's not useful to critically think about your creative work when you're working on it, but save that for after you let your imagination explore things, come up with different ideas and variations. And then once you start to test something and you're playing with something, that's the time for critical thinking. That's the time to analyze, well, what's happening? Does this product work? Does this service work? Do people like this design that I've made? That's where critical thinking works. And then once you get the data back from them and you've studied there and you have some insights about how they're responding to the creative thing you've made, then let your imagination work again. And so there's this kind of movement back and forth between letting your imagination really like run wild, and then testing things and seeing what people think and analyzing that, and then using your imagination again. And if you do this, what you're able to get is to understand additive value to you as an artist and your company. If you're able to train your mind this way, you're able to develop unique services and products that other people can't. You also develop a valuable and transferable mental skill or process. Like creative thinking also just makes us healthier people, and it actually changes the way our minds work. It helps us be like calm, be patient, helps us think differently about problems, helps our mind be more flexible. It reduces stress. And all of this improves our ability to think critically and just be flexible. Life is constant change. It is constant change. We are living in I think all of us can look out at the world and see how unbelievably unpredictable things are every day with what's going on. The COVID alone has helped all of us continue to embrace the fact that things constantly change and it's a highly uncertain world. Thinking creatively helps us actually recognize and adapt more quickly and effectively to change. So whether it's like the shock of COVID system or a life challenge with like a family or a loved one or something in business, the more we train our mind to think creatively, the more effective we are at adapting, and the more effective we are at coming up with novel ways to navigate through life. And so, Kelly, I'm going to pass this over to you to talk, because you've got you can share any number of stories about how you have worked with your creative process and how that affects the way you've shown up in business and in life.
Oh my gosh. So, actually, I want to pause before I talk. We've got some really fantastic questions and observations in the chat that, I think all of you you're asking the questions and thinking about this in exactly the way that that Kevin and I have thought about this throughout our entire life. So I want to make sure that before we move on, we start talking about some of that. But for me, one of the ways that I have been creative throughout my professional career is actually as someone who does the business piece of things. I'm largely a strategist, where I apply my sort of creative thinking into what I call the shadow spaces between other roles and other disciplines. So I've largely worked as a process manager, as a product manager, and as somebody who's looking at that data and trying to tell a story with it. A lot of times, again, I've had challenges where the information doesn't fit with the story we want to tell. We need to move on. And I use that creativity not to change the story or change the numbers so that they reflect the story, but to find a way to understand what those numbers are saying and how to make it a useful thing, and what to do next with it. And I think that's where some of the innovation comes in. In terms of my sort of artistic expression beyond that level of creativity, it honestly has been largely stifled throughout my professional career, coming out in fits and starts with my hobbies. And it's only recently, I think, because of the amount of volatility and change in our world, that I've come to embrace the creativity that I have as something that, if not ultimately profitable, is definitely something that is of value. As we talked about earlier, that innovation, or that creativity is a game changer. It's a value. It's an advantage that we have over other less creative people.
Thank you. Since I can't see the chat right now, since I'm presenting, do we want to touch on, maybe pick one or two questions, and then we can come back to the rest of them in about 10 minutes?
For sure. I think one of the sort of, there's a logistical theme to a few of these about, if you have strengths as a creative person, some of these other aspects of that design process, that creative thinking process, like, what do you do with those? Does it make sense to give them to someone else, or to take them on yourself? And I think you touched on some of it when you talked about, there are times when you need to let that creative vision flow and not stifle it. And then other times when you need to sort of converge and give it some structure.
Yeah.
And then another one that's kind of alongside of that is almost a logistical one about sharing spaces with other creative people. How do you express yourself creatively in those spaces without sort of compromising your creativity or damaging someone else's? And I think, as one of the newest members of Centered, I want to take that one real quick.
Please.
Because one of the things that I've seen working with Kevin and with Mikey is that our creative strengths are very different. They're in fundamentally different sort of areas of our life and areas of our professional world. And what we have done is build a level of respect and acknowledgement that we have these different strengths. And so there is a balance of, I might have a different opinion, or Kevin might, or Mikey might, but if it's sort of in my bailiwick or my domain, then I am the one that is sort of, that pushes that forward. And it's my position or my idea that we go with. And that's after discussion, and that's after acknowledging that everyone has different positions or different perspectives on it. But if it's my domain, or if it's Kevin's domain or Mikey's domain, that's the one that we tend to lead with.
Yeah, well said. And what I want to expand on that is what I hear in those questions is, how do I share creative space with other people and respect creative boundaries? And that's what I appreciate with the story that you shared, Kelly, is like how we come to do that as a group in Centered. And the other question is, what do I do if I don't have certain skill sets? Like, I've got a creative idea, a creative product, creative service, like an art form that I have that I want to monetize, and I want to have a creative lifestyle, a business around that, or have other people pay me for that art. What do I do if I don't have certain skills? So you find people to help you. And one of the complex challenges of anybody on the call that's about to do a startup, or at the beginning stages of a startup, or are trying to grow a startup, finding people to collaborate with is critical. And it's not just about having other skills around you that can help you with the skills you don't have. It's also about how you share ideas with other people to make your ideas better. I can attest that I as an artist, I can get super controlling of my creative ideas. I have surrounded myself with other people that help me not do that. And the reason for that is it makes the ideas better. Like other people, if we're really creative thinkers, we default to like in the human thing, we like our own ideas, and that's a human thing. That's okay, But also letting other people experiment with our ideas, or giving us different ideas than our own ideas, actually enhances the way our mind thinks. It helps the flexibility and the creative process in our mind. So yes, share boundaries with other people creatively, and learn how to dialogue with people creatively in a constructive way. There are different techniques for this, but first, acknowledge somebody else's creativity. Validate their idea, right? Hey, I think that's a really interesting idea you put forth. I see where you're going with that idea. What if we possibly do this? Right? That helps people see that you care about your creativity. You can't be disingenuous about this stuff. Like, people, especially creatives, like we're emotional people. Like, we understand these things. The goal is like to really connect with people creatively, even if you dislike their idea. And you can tell them honestly, like, hey, I can see you worked really hard on this and I get where you're going. This is what's coming up for me. So the starting point is really empathy. This is like the root of like UCD and HCD work, is to really have empathy. And there's empathy for people that we're studying in the marketplace because we want to develop a product or service with. But the same principle around having empathy with our creative partner is the same thing. It's empathy for like the fact that they did something, or someone that's on our team. So acknowledge them first. And definitely look for people that can help you with skills that you don't have. So Centered as a company, I have thought of this because I'm on my second startup. The first one crashed and burned in like a blaze of glory in a short period of time. And one of the things that was really important to me is like, find other good people to work with. I don't really like doing finances. I don't want to do accounting. I want other people to do that stuff. Mikey, who you haven't met here, is like he's an amazing musician, and he's also trained in economics. He makes things like more concise. He has skill sets that I don't have. He challenges my thinking. Kelly was brought to the team because she disrupts thinking. She has a whole different way of like organizing information. And we have other team members that are like that as well. So the goal is like, surround yourself with really good people. Don't try to force yourself to do things long-term that you don't want to do. Try to find people that you can work with, or outsource or hire other people to like do that work for you. And work in your passion area, and also allow yourself to be pushed into uncomfortable spaces, right? You don't want to get so boxed into your own pattern that you don't actually train yourself to think different ways. But it's not like if you're a designer and you're doing fashion, it's not like you have to teach yourself to be an accountant, right? You just can find another person to be an accountant. Kelly, anything you want to add on that?
I think we could talk about this for hours and hours, so we should probably move on and get to the next phase of this really quickly, so we can get back to all of this.
So the most important thing I want all of you to take away from this is the money, the lifestyle, and it's not just about making a lot of money, right? It's like, I'll be very honest with you. I make less money inside of Centered than I do working for other people, but I'm happier. I could make a lot more money selling my creative thinking and my skills in the marketplace at agencies, design firms, places I've worked before, but it doesn't bring me joy. The reason I do Centered, the reason I started it, the reason that I made it the way that I made it to then have other people like Kelly and Michael come in and run it, is like, I don't really actually even want to be a CEO. I don't want to be an executive director. What we're doing is growing the company so I can do the things that I like doing, which is really this. Like, I like the emotional, physical benefits and mental benefits of living a life as an artist and a creative, and having an innovation company allows me to do that. And I get to surround myself with other people that have different skill sets, and we all work together so we can all live a life that we like and make enough money to get by. And so the thing I want you to take from this is that creative flow has mental, physical, and emotional benefits. The more you practice it, the more you do it, the more likely you are to be successful with it. It can be painful because sometimes we can 90%, 95, 90, sometimes 99% of the shit we make, no one's going to like it. And that's okay. And that takes you got to have a lot of courage to keep making things over and over again. But the more that we do it, the more that we expose our thinking, the more we expose our art, the more emotional like strength we build, the more courage you build, and the more likely we are to make something that's successful and develop a skill set that where we can have a little business, or we can work as a creative consultant, or we can do something in fashion or music or design. So practice, be vulnerable with your creativity, and really just trust yourself to just expose your art and your thinking or your design or your product or your service to people. If you don't show people what you're doing, if you don't expose it, you can't actually figure out if things work. It makes it harder to have creative flow. And creative flow is the process of going from an imagined idea to making something and feeling really good while doing it. So repeat that over and over again, and it pays off emotionally and spiritually and psychologically. Has mental benefits, helps your health, and you're more likely to actually just be able to do really cool stuff in life and in business.
I think that is so critical. The flip side of that is that if you do spend your time, your creative energy, to the highest bidder, to a company or a cause that you don't feel connected to, you end up, the opposite happens, right? Your health suffers, your balance suffers, your ability to do anything, and honestly, your ability to then be creative. If you don't do this in a way where you continue to have that joy structured in, which may sound counterintuitive, then you lose the joy, and then you lose that strength and that advantage that your creativity has. It's draining, and I know we all have experienced that, and I know that there's points where you do have to set it aside. But the more that you can create space for that and maintain space for that, the more successful in general, both in terms financially and mentally and spiritually, you become.
Amen to that. And so as we go forward in the presentation, the next couple slides, we're going to move really, really fast. And so I want to thread together what Kelly said with the next part of the presentation. It's like, it's important. The practice is important. It means that people aren't going to really understand how much time you put into creative. This is where people it's common to use the term like creatives and non-creatives, right? But if we look at how we are when we're kids, everybody's playing and being creative as kids. It's just like some people just let go of that and forget about that as they grow and they mature in life, and others of us stay doing stuff like that, right? But let's just say that over time, there are people that kind of have a deeper understanding of creativity and those that don't. That often makes it hard to value your creativity when selling it or transacting with people, because people will go like, why is that so expensive? It's like, well, it took me 10 years and 1,000 hours to make that one product like that. And so that's why I sell it at this rate, right? So people will try to question creativity. And a lot of times as creatives, we undervalue our own thinking and our time. That's a common thing. So what I want to show you very quickly is just a snapshot of at an economic level, what's going on in a few places around the world of the value of creativity. So it really helps you trust that you deserve to be fairly compensated for your stuff. To pay attention to how much time you put into things, and to really experiment with pricing so that you can find a price where you feel fairly compensated for your time, your thinking, your creativity. So just check this out. $2.2 trillion for Africa's contribution to the global creative economy, right? That's almost 1% of the global GDP. That's how much is just coming. That's just how it's coming out of that continent. South Africa's GDP, 3.1% is in the creative economy. Most of that's coming from film, music, fashion, and gaming. In the United States, it's 919 billion in annual value in the United States for creative things, right? That's 4.3% of U.S. GDP. That is a huge chunk of the economy in the United States. Its annual value in a place like Poland, 117 polty is their currency in billions, right? In Italy, it's 84.9 billion in euros in Italy. In Hong Kong, it's 4.4% of the GDP. Creative leaders have 67% more revenue in their business than what are called non-creative leaders. This is defined by flexible thinking, imagination, creative processes, creative ideation. That's how they start to think about the difference between a creative leader and a non-creative leader. 74% of creative leaders that work in corporations actually drive higher value for those enterprise corporations. So I want to give you just a snapshot, the effect of creativity on the global economy or a country's economy is significant. So anytime that you have some moment where you question your value, it's no, it has a lot of value in society. The imagination, the arts, being
Oh no, I think we might have lost Kevin.
Yeah, I think we did. I almost thought it was my network. But if possible, is it possible that I shoot a question about this idea that Kevin was presenting to you, Kelly?
You can try if it's about the financial and economic impact, global impact of creativity. That is definitely not my bailiwick.
No.
But we'll see what I can do.
It might actually be suited to your new position at Centered. Someone was asking, like, when you're engaged by a startup or an SME or whatever small enterprise, and you're brought in as head of operations, leading with your creative direction, what type of value do you put that in context of equity that you can ask from that SME or small business?
Again, I think that's exactly the sort of question that is sort of better for Kevin to answer. My experience has not been in leading or joining or building these businesses. It's been just sort of jumping in.
All right, no problem. So maybe
Yeah.
we can go to the next one, which says, is it possible to have a lot of ideas and run with them all at once? Or is it wiser to take one idea first and fully develop it before including other creative ideas?
So I love this question. This one I can answer. As somebody who has a hard time focusing, I think this is one of those examples of where your process, taking a look at that and what feels comfortable for you is a really important step to take. So all of your ideas all at once, it will be difficult for you to move forward and to sort of get a momentum and a rhythm in order to sort of turn one into something that is profitable or turn one into a successful business. At the same time, as creative people, if we focus too much on one scenario, one thing, I personally lose interest. If I see the goal or if I see some sort of monotonous step near me, then I sort of fade away. So I think for me, I find that balance of what makes sense to focus on. And then when other things kind of get pulled into what I'm interested in, what I'm focusing on, I pay attention to that because that's usually a sign that I either need to switch gears a little bit or there's a piece of what I'm working on that I'm missing. So finding that balance for yourself between those is kind of crucial. And then of course, and this is perhaps creativity 101, any idea that you have, write it down, spend enough time with it so that when you want to come back to it later, you have enough of that initial germ of an idea that you can continue to grow it.
Thank you very much, Kelly. Speaking on that, there's also the idea of, it's called the power of procrastination. I think someone did a TED talk about it, that as you develop your idea, write it down, put it in a parking bay or parking spot, then come back to it like after a week or 2 weeks. You will keep on developing your idea and you become more refined in that way. So you can have several vehicles, which are your ideas parked. Then after every regular interval, you come back and see if you can refine it further, which goes to the same thing that you were talking about not spending too much time on one idea, that it might actually exhaust you and you do not have any new elements that you can add to it. So like she said, it's a balance of seeing what works best for you, but also not spending too much time on one idea. Then there's a question, sorry about that. There's a question that says, how do you deal with imagination, which goes so far that it overwhelms you and you do not know where to start, and it's all just a mess. The ideas and the juices keep on coming, but you do not know where to start.
Yeah, that's a great, sorry I dropped before. That is a great question. And I can really share the overwhelming feeling of like, oh my gosh, there's just so many ideas and information coming in. How do I work with this? In my youth, I'm 40 now. I tried to just like make as much stuff as possible, right? Just practice. Now that I'm in my 40s, actually, it's a lot of meditation. Honestly, it's a lot of like helping train the mind to discern what ideas I want to work with so that I don't distract myself from too many different things at the same time. That takes a level of understanding of what you enjoy doing and where you want to focus your attention in life. It can be challenging with all the different priorities that we have coming up with family, with friends, with whatever it is that helps us like be, and other things that are we just do as part of our commitments in life to keep a focus. That requires training, and it's practice. So there's being aware of what you want to do, there's practicing doing it, and saying no to things, which can be very hard for creative people, is to say no because we like a lot of stuff. But yeah, practice saying no, and practice focusing on the things that you want to do most.
Yeah, I agree with that. I have experienced those moments in my life where the thoughts are just too big to be contained, and it used to be very frustrating. It's like, I don't have time for this idea. I don't have time for something that's this, I have too many other things on my plate, a balance of family and home. And I've come to respect those and honor those moments as a gift. If I don't have the time to spend, to go somewhere for days and days and work on them, at least making sure I've got space to see them completely. Kevin used the phrase meditation. I know there's a lot of mindfulness. There's a lot of different ways we approach that. But the creating just a small amount of space to embrace that passion and that power, and recognize that that's sort of the raw material of what makes us creative and innovative, will help you leverage that power in other ways.
Well said. And that ties into some questions about whether creativity is part of human nature, needs to be nurtured or nurtured. And someone said, should I be worried if I seem too rigid or failing to think creatively? So yes, imagination and creativity seems to be an inherent human feature, right? It's something, the way that the mind works through imagining, through story, through narrative, through information moving through it, and then imaging out things, right? But it also needs to be honed. This is why you see a lot of people like don't have that skill set as they go on in life, but if you look at kids playing, they're always imagining and playing games and just playing, right? So it's inherent, it's natural for us to be creative. We also have to practice it, or we lose the skill set, particularly by the way that society is set up. It doesn't support that type of creative thinking. As we go further along in life, actually it's the reverse of it. Tries to tell people not to do that it's too risky, focus on other things that are more certain. And so for the person that asks, like, should I be worried if I'm not thinking creatively? It's like, well, the fact that you're worried, that's an interesting question. And I would say creatively explore that. And really ask yourself, like, one, are you drawn to something creative? And is the rigidness that you're referring to, is it causing any challenges in your life? Do you feel like you're losing out on experiences or opportunity? And if so, then continue to explore, try to work with that energy. Like, don't fight it. Don't expect yourself to suddenly just like not be a rigid thinker, but say, like, there's a time and a place for rigid thinking. Actually, it can be very useful in the creative process. So it's not like you have to let go of that skill set. It can be really useful, and you just want to know when and where to deploy that, and then practice some more unstructured, flexible thinking. Okay. And toggle between those two worlds. And that's a superpower. Like if people can master being like analytical and structured and rigid and creative, you've got like a super power.
So I'm going to interrupt you, Kevin, or
go for no, please.
Yeah, because this is one of those, we talked earlier about Kevin's strengths versus mine versus Mikey's. Kevin, bless his heart, is not a rigid, structured person by default. Whereas Mikey absolutely is, and I am as well. There is a beauty and a creativity to structure. This is where I have, throughout my career, spent most of my creative energy. I believe that, so I started actually as a software developer, and there's a beauty in code, there's a beauty in structure. One of my favorite creative exercises is bringing order to chaos. Is a spreadsheet that can show you amazing trends, is looking at something that is full of patterns and finding that anomaly. That requires so much imagination, and it is so undervalued in a lot of ways. We talk about, you know, the people who are creative, capital C creative, and then the rest of us, the nerds, the geeks. Those are terms that we use in the States. And owning and embracing how powerful and how much creativity those skills take is a way to to get yourself past that idea that it isn't creative or that it's separate than your creativity. From my perspective, those are one and the same. Those are part of my strengths. You know, if you work in textiles and you cut fashion, like there's a rigidity and a structure to that. This is obviously where I'm very passionate. That is absolutely part of your process. That is part of who you are and part of what makes you a strong creative. And I will get down off that soapbox now.
I don't know if this is a good time. Kevin, will you be continuing with your presentation, or this is the Q&A part?
Oh yeah, no, I don't know where I cut out when I cut out with like the data and this stuff, but I was after the data I presented. I don't know how far where I cut out, but yeah, this was all supposed to be Q&A now.
All right,
yeah.
Great. So
there was like 2 slides left, and it was really
okay.
just more about there is money.
Yeah,
it's profitable.
Okay.
It's profitable.
So there's a question which I really think fits the context that we're in right now, and borderline can be depressive for a creative. And the question is, how would you recommend one should work through a creative block?
Well, we all have our yeah, no, it can be super depressive. It can be like maddening. I think we're all very different in how we do this. I used to force myself to like work through creative blocks. I've learned over time that makes it worse, and it actually just like it chemically in the brain, stress is like it produces cortisol, right? And there's other drugs that the brain produces when it's stressed. The more stressed we get in a creative process, the more we turn off the parts of the brain that are actually used for imagination. So the stuff that people will tell you is just like push through, work hard. Like, it's not true. The brain doesn't work that way. The best thing to do for creative blocks is actually relax, is to stop trying to push through something and relax. This is where mindfulness, changing the task that you're working on, putting yourself in a different environment, actually walking away from the creative thing you're working on for a period of time helps the mind relax. It changes the stress mechanism in the brain, and it relaxes the mind, and you're more likely to come up with an idea to work through it. So there's an awesome person that I work with and train with, and says, when you're stuck, do nothing. And what he means by that is like, do nothing. So what I've learned is like, I sit on swings, like I go for a bike ride. Like, I just move the energy a different direction, and I allow myself to naturally like have an idea present itself naturally. Kelly, for you, what are you doing with blocks?
A bit of everything. We talked earlier about that sort of the power of procrastination. A perfect example right now, I will own, is despite the fact that I've been working with Centered since February of this year, my bio is not up on the website because I can't write it for some reason. That is great. So it's not my words. And it's one of those things where like there's a block, and that sometimes that procrastination, like Kevin said, can make it worse. You know, you hit that deadline, and the more you think about it, and the more you're like, I can't believe I can't do this. I can't believe I can't do this. The harder it gets. And so taking those moments to pause, to embrace it. I guess, you know, a lot of it is, it's about embracing the fact that those blocks are part of the process, that there's a message in them, and to sit with them, to live with them, to own them, and not think of them as adversarial is kind of one of the best ways. And yes, stop and do nothing, focus on something else, completely and utterly like erase it from your mind as much as possible, and go find something else that's stimulating. If you know that there's an activity or a skill, a place, something that just brings you joy, that brings you passion, that reminds you of everything that you love about being who you are, just go to that place and don't sit there and wait for the block to release itself. Just be in that moment. And when you come out of it, you will have something, and it may be a lack of block. You may have sort of broken that down into what it needs to be, or it may be something else that's going to inspire you in a way that will help you work around it.
Well said.
Great. Thank you very much. So earlier, I know we have a few minutes left. Hopefully you allow us like an extra 2 minutes or so. Earlier, we were talking about the value of creativity, and Kevin managed to show us some statistics about how valuable creativity is for the creative sector. So there's a question, I think there are actually two that relate to the value of creativity. The first being, this one is directed to you, Kevin. Say you're in a business, be it a startup or SME or any small enterprise, and you're brought in to bring in your creative juices into that enterprise. Let's say, for an example, as a head of operations, and you're the lead within that team. So the question is, what type of equity could I ask for from that enterprise in order to fully appreciate my value as a lead in an SME or startup, seeing that possibly equity is being offered to leadership positions?
Yeah. So the question, and make sure I understand this. So the question is, how do you value the creative work that you've done before you got to the company and at the company to then negotiate for equity in the company? Am I understanding that correctly?
100%.
All right. So yeah, that's definitely a thing I've done before, right? I have negotiated with companies. I've come in and said, like, look, I have this skill set that's worth this much in the marketplace. I developed it before I got to you, right? That has a price tag to it. And then I would say to them, and I'm going to do some things in your company that have a value as well. So I'm going to apply my skill set, and you need to pay me for that training that I have that I'm going to bring to your company. And I'm going to use that training to develop some new things in your company that has a value. So what that gets into is what type of goals are you going to reach for the company? How are you going to alter the company's business? The more clearly you can, one, describe the skills that you bring to the company that are relevant to what they're trying to achieve, the more clearly you can ask for the value of your training, which is what you've done before you got there. That's your experience, your expertise, right? Then the more clearly you can tie your experience and skill set to the company's goals, or give them new goals. Like, if you can figure out a goal that they haven't thought of, you can charge money for that. If you think of something new or different and it's a creative perspective that they don't have, you can put a value to that. So I've done this at startups as well. I've worked at a lot of startups, right? I've come in and said, my skill set is worth this base salary. I want to trade you this for some equity, and I want some cash. And I have a different vision for you for how to grow with this product or service. Here's how I can enhance it. And because I'm going to bring that in, I'd also like to take a little bit more equity, or I want to increase my salary. So you should feel safe and comfortable charging money for your experience and expertise, but make sure you tie that to what the company's trying to do, or it won't make sense to people, right? So this is where, Kelly, you can chime in with this, of like the stories we tell people, right? You creatively, like, you help them understand how your creative skill set affects their business, and put a value to that, and then help them understand how you're going to grow their business and put a value to that, and then trade in for equity. But how you value that is going to be dependent, like what the actual quantity of the value is dependent on what the startup is worth, relative to what you think you can do for the startup. And one technique I've used is, the younger the startup, the less cash I'll ask for and the more equity. Especially if you really believe in it. Don't do that if you don't really believe in the startup. Take the cash, because if you don't believe in them, that means you don't think they're going to do well. So go for the equity. Equity is if you really like people and you want to, it's like getting married. You're going to take equity. Like, you got to really like the people, like the company, like the product, like the service.
Great.
Yeah, I think
thank you very much.
There's a balance there
Kelly,
between what you're going to get out of it versus what you're giving into it. And if there's something you're going to get out of it that is worth more to you than money, then that allows you to balance those priorities.
Yeah, more succinct, Kelly. Thanks for that. That's much
No,
more clear.
they asked the question while you were offline, and I was like, "Oh, do not speak with me about equity." That's. I was like, yeah, pretty much any question except financial ones, and then it was that one.
Yeah. I don't know, Kelly and Kevin, do you have like an extra 2 or so minutes, or
Yeah,
I
go
can
for
send
it,
you
please.
the questions on via email?
Yeah,
Absolutely.
go for it.
It's only 9 a.m. here. I've got a whole day ahead of me.
Yeah.
All right,
we're
cool.
good.
So the other one that was somewhat related to the idea of value is you're trying to introduce systems or creative systems within a space that you're working with, but the people there are not appreciating or seeing the value of your ideas. So the question is, do I stick with trying to convince them, or do I just leave and go to a place where I'm appreciated?
Oh my gosh.
Kelly,
You've just
that's how I was just thinking of you with where you came.
you described my career. I think as someone who is always disruptive, as Kevin said, I have found, and I feel like I'm almost becoming a broken record with this of deciding what you're getting out of it and what is worth putting into it. I started very headstrong and very clear with what I believed was true and right, and this answer is going to work. And I was not interested in hearing anyone's dissent because I knew what I had to offer was going to work. And I was right, I believe, for the most part, that all of my ideas were going to work. Because again, process is one of my creative domains. But then as I've matured, I've realized that you can have that idea, you can have the solution in hand, but if you can't get someone to go along with you, if you can't find a way, that narrative, it's one of the first user-centered designs I think I ever did. If you can't actually make a change, if you can't help people grow and learn, then you haven't actually won. You haven't done anything. You weren't right in a lot of ways. So finding that balance of what you can do to affect change, of what you can do to move them towards that space, whether it's taking the time to let them see, whether it's finding a compromise that is useful, that is still on that path towards whatever that North Star or that ultimate process-driven goal is important. And is essential to it. And yeah, there are times when if you feel like you have hit a spot where you're not providing value, and kind of we talked about earlier of you're getting drained by putting that sort of that energy, that creativity into your role, and you're not getting anything out of it, then creating space for yourself to move on is essential. And you'll be happier on the other side of that. Eventually, it's to use the marriage analogy as well. If you're in a personal relationship and you reach a point where you don't see a future, then the sooner you can extricate yourself from that, the better, the healthier everyone will be. It's tough when there's emotions involved, and I feel like as creatives we always have our emotions involved, whether it's personal or professional. But yeah, you gotta look after yourself.
Yeah, well said. And I'll add to that I've learned in my life to pick workable relationships, and it's okay if people don't understand things, but it's not my job to help other people like come to awarenesses. People have to actively engage the process, and then we can share things back and forth. But we can't force people to have the awareness to engage in a problem or a process or anything for that matter. Once people engage, then we can collaborate. That's where empathy comes and learning comes. But if people don't want to engage, that's not workable, right? And so both Kelly and I have bounced around. I've worked at creative agencies, design agencies, ad agencies, marketing agencies, and the thing that I learned after doing that for almost 10 years is work with people that that are engaged, that want to work on the same thing. We might have differences of opinion, we might like challenge each other. We might even argue. We might even get super frustrated and annoyed, and that's okay. But we're all working towards the same end, and that's what I mean by like pick workable relationships. Otherwise, you're just going to feel really defeated, and it's not really going to be enjoyable. It's like nothing, like there's no point to do something that's not and doesn't bring you joy, right? It's like that's not a healthy way to live.
Yeah, I
cool.
think.
Go for it, Kelly.
I think, Kevin, you're showing a little bit of your privilege there, because you've had, with your life, you've had that ability to bounce around and to move on. I've definitely been stuck in positions where, there is going to be a squeaky wheel or somebody that is not in the process, but there's really nothing that can be done about it at the time. And in that case, it is finding that balance. It's recognizing how much you're willing to give, how much you're willing to tolerate, and sort of structuring yourself around it, if that makes sense, because I know that we don't all, and I know you have too, Kevin, you've worked with a lot of people that you've struggled with and had to stay in those relationships, but there's something, you just got to kind of have to find that balance with yourself and that compromise, what you're willing to, or how much you need to give of yourself for that person. Sorry, I said that very awkwardly. I didn't mean to shut you all the way down.
No, it's okay. That's good for people to hear the difference in philosophy. Like, yes, I as a single person that doesn't have kids, I have made huge moves in my life. I've taken huge financial risks. I've lost I've made very little money at points. Other times I've made good money, and I've been able to just walk away from things. And really continue to but I've had a lot of pain in that process, and it's different, and people have different experiences and different priorities, right? If I had a family, that would be different. I could, there's certain risks that I couldn't take. And so that's a good point, Kelly. I appreciate you pointing that out. I see one more question we didn't get to, the stamina question, if we want to do that one. So the building creative stamina. So for the person who feels like they don't have previous history of creativity, just if you have access to any picture you drew when you were a kid, go get that. If you have a picture of yourself as a little kid playing, go look at that. It'll remind you that you have a history of being creative. Then go get yourself a toy. I mean, like a little kid toy, and get something that you actually like. It could be like a doll, a stuffed animal, I don't know, something that you remember that you like when you were a kid, and just hang out with that toy for a little bit. It's going to remind you of what it's like to play with your imagination and to play. And that's the beginning of being able to rebuild your creative stamina, is to remember how good it feels to play. The point of creativity is play. It's what, and if you can make money off of playing, that's a great way to be as an adult. But yeah, to get back in touch with that kid part of you, get a toy, look at a picture of yourself as a kid, and start from there, and then see what emerges and what you get attracted to in terms of what other creative things you might want to explore. But you have a history, it's in there, and you just want to reconnect with that part of yourself.
Great, thank you very much. And also to add on that, there's several other exercises that you could use within UCD, user-centered design or human-centered design, that will help you explore your creativity. And if you're also trying to make someone be more creative, you can ask them to use those exercises too. I believe it's more about creative confidence, creative stamina, where everyone is creative, but people are just not confident enough to let out their creativity. I'm not sure if there was a question that wasn't answered. The one that Nyasha Piloto had asked, I think it was answered in the idea of if you're within a space where your creativity is not being valued, should you leave, or should you stick with it and try and convince them? Then I think the last question, Kevin and Kelly, someone asked, may I find out what is the difference between creativity and innovation? To me, these two are interrelated. How then can one figure out the difference between these two abstract terms, creativity and innovation?
I think this is a very simple, a perfect example of user-centered design. Someone will pay you to be innovative. They may not pay you to be creative. The product that you're delivering is your creativity. But when you want to sell it to, you think about your end user, the person who's hiring you, they want innovation. And it is literally the exact same thing. It's just turning that story into what they need to hear in order for you to serve them.
Yes, and depending on the personality that you're talking to, it is the same thing, except the way people think about it in business is going to be different. Creativity is a process, innovation is an outcome. So innovation is the thing you make for them, which is what Kelly's talking about. It's like it's something you that people expect from you. So the way to divide it, even though it really is, innovation is the process of innovating is the process of being creative. But if you need to divide it for somebody, it's like creativity is the process that gets us the innovation. If you can't innovate without being creative. So if you want the outcome of the thing, of the innovation output, you have to have a creative process that goes along with it to get to the output.
Great. Thank you very much, Kelly and Kevin. There's another one, but I think that one is for discussion for another day, because it's about how to make the African context or the African communities value more of the creative sector. But I think that's a conversation that we can have during the 10-week of this program. And with that, thank you very much, Kelly and Kevin. I don't know if you had any closing remarks before we end this.
I just want to say thank you so much for spending your time, your sunny afternoon with us. One of my favorite things about conversations like this is I feel quite possibly more inspired by talking with you and reading your questions and engaging with you than maybe you guys are as well. This is part of my creative process. So thank you for giving your time to me today.
Thank you, Kelly.
Yeah, I just want to echo that. It's an honor to come in here and share with other creatives. One of the things that for me that I love is helping other creatives figure out how to make a life off of being creative. Because it's one of the hardest things to do as like a creative is to try to make a living. And even in just getting by as a creative is actually pretty amazing. So for those of you that are trying to figure out how to value your creative in your community, from an outsider's perspective, there's a spotlight on the growth of creativity and the economics in Africa coming from other countries, from EU and from the United States. If you Google the data on this, it's one of the easiest ways to help people understand that there's like a trend that is changing. It's a developing market. It's going to continue to move. And some of you are going to be early adopters. You're going to be the first ones to start moving on stuff. And that gives you an advantage, and people aren't going to understand. So you just keep doing like what you trust doing, keep working at it, and know that like some people aren't going to understand, and that's okay. Things change as they change. You can't force the society to change any faster, but you can contribute to the change by doing your creative thing, pricing it fairly, and just sharing what you share and standing by that.
Great. Thank you very much, Kevin and Kelly.
You're welcome.
Thank you for dedicating your time to the ladies. And also, if you need to reach out to them, they sent out their emails in the chat box, but we'll also send them again within the WhatsApp group. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for choosing to be here today. And we hope you learned a lot. We will be talking again next week, Wednesday. Please just check your calendar invite for the Zoom link for the virtual session that's happening next week, Wednesday. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your day and also your weekend. We'll be in touch next week. Enjoy.
Have a wonderful weekend and take the ACT training. It's amazing.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Have a wonderful weekend. Thanks again, everybody. Appreciate you.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you
You're
so
welcome.
much.
You're welcome.
Thank you so